Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today it is me and it's a bite-sized episode. And I want to talk all about people pleasing, one of my favourite topics. And anyone who's a regular listener to this podcast will know that this is an issue that is very close to my heart. And I would say that when I was suffering from bulimia, that people pleasing was a core kind of issue that was definitely contributing to keeping the problem going, because people pleasing was leading me to really abandon myself. I was not in touch with my emotions in a healthy way, and I used to use the eating disorder very much as a coping strategy, sort of a maladaptive way to try and deal with everything that I just could not deal with. So for me, in my past, I spent a huge part of my life worrying about what others thought of me. So much did I value being liked, fitting in, putting others at ease, rather than taking care of myself. I would always be that person that said yes, who helped out, and I very much would often just discard my own sort of thoughts, feelings, desires, which actually I often was just completely out of touch with anyway. But, I would just do whatever I needed to do to keep the harmony, to keep the peace. And I remember one of my sisters reflected this back to me in recent years, that, just when we were sitting at the table having our dinner as children with my mum and dad, how I would very much sort of take on that role really of trying to create peace and harmony. And if things were kind of kicking off, I would very much want to step in and make it all okay. So from very, very young, really, it was something that became part of who I was. So with people pleasing as well, if I came up against a life decision, I never really had any internal sort of compass of knowing what was right for me. So what I would do is I would speak to several friends in succession to get their advice on what I should do. And actually as well, it's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because I think when we ask for help, people usually are quite generous with their advice. They want to fix us and dispense it. That comes with really, really good intentions. But I think as a people pleaser, this is really, really challenging, because you often go to people who have strong opinions, who have like great advice in a way on how to fix you. And often, I guess, though, their advice isn't necessarily right for you, although it's dispensed with a lot of good intention. And what I would often do as well is, I think, speak to several people in my life who had those kind of strong opinions, who were really kind of fixers. And then I would be in complete conflict, because I would be getting different advice from different people. And then I'd be really worried about trying to please those people. And, I was just in such a mess, really. I just didn't really know who I was, what I was doing. It was just a nightmare. So having compassion for myself, I had good reasons to become a people pleaser. So growing up, I learned really early on that by being the kind of good girl, it brought reward and acceptance. And I liked having that identity in the family of being like the responsible older sister who took care of everyone, who didn't make a fuss, who just kind of coped with everything, created harmony, was easygoing. I liked identifying myself in that way, and it brought a lot of short-term reward, because of people would then feed back to me, oh Harry, you're really easygoing, and they kind of really liked it that I was really smiley, and it just kind of reinforced it all the more, really. I kind of felt like, well, this is the way I need to show up in the world, and this means I kind of get approval and acceptance. And I would also really avoid confrontation, judgment and criticism. So if anything kind of kicked off at home, I would very much kind of get out the way, or I'd be doing my absolute best to try and smooth it all over and make it all kind of nice, I guess, but without really addressing the conflict that was going on. And the real sort of downside of this, although it was a very much a survival strategy, obviously, and it kind of kept me safe and it brought me a lot of reward, it meant as well that I wasn't really very authentic. People often didn't really get to know who I really was. And I was often kind of living out whatever, I was sort of becoming whoever someone wanted me to be. I was very good at, like, if someone sort of was projecting onto me in a way that I was this kind of happy, smiley person that always went along with things, I'd very much take on that role and become that person. And part of that was me, but also, of course, I was hiding really a whole other side of me, because every human being has negative emotions, sometimes doesn't agree with others, sometimes there is conflict. That is a normal part of life. So you can see tremendous costs, really. So although for myself, outwardly smiling and cooperative, I really had no clue about who I was. I was just simply a reflection of the world around me. And inwardly, I would often feel quite angry and resentful at putting others first. But then when I felt that anger and resentment, I would feel guilty for feeling this, because I would feel like, well, I don't have permission to have my own needs, really. And this wasn't even a kind of logical kind of thought through process. I would just, if I felt angry and resentful, I would almost immediately sort of squash that and think, oh, I feel really guilty for feeling this, so I must just push it down, and I would just try and avoid it, really. But of course, it's impossible to hide, isn't it? Because although I wasn't actually speaking out and saying what I thought openly, it would often leak out in other ways. So if I'd people pleased in a relationship for a while, maybe one day it would all leak out in one great big burst of anger, and that could be then really damaging for the relationship, because the other person would be thinking, well, where's all this come from? I thought everything was kind of fine, and in a way, how would they know things weren't fine? Because I hadn't been communicating. So definitely it cost me some of my relationships, because I would be people pleasing for a period of time, and then it would get to the point actually where I couldn't sustain it, because it would just become so unbearable, and I was squashing myself so much that it would then kind of leak out in these kind of behaviours. So maybe I would be kind of like avoid wanting to meet up with the person, or I would just be a bit kind of offhand and grumpy. It'd be leaking out in more indirect ways, even though I wasn't communicating openly. And also, I would direct many of the feelings that I couldn't really deal with inwardly in a very self-destructive way through the eating disorder. So, for example, if I was feeling quite angry about something, and I felt perhaps I didn't have permission to feel angry about that, maybe something had happened in a relationship, I might restrict my eating in quite a punishing way as a way to try and sort of numb and avoid that anger. Or I might turn to food and use kind of binge eating as a way to stuff down that anger and escape from that anger, and almost just distract from it for a while. And also I might use purging as well as a way to almost try and cleanse myself and get rid of that anger. Although, of course, temporarily it may have felt that that anger was going away, but actually it wasn't actually solving the root of the problem. I would like temporarily get some relief from my difficult emotions, but actually I wasn't really kind of dealing with them or resolving issues or talking openly in my relationships. So people pleasing was incredibly damaging as well, not just in my friendships, but in my romantic relationships too. And I would often just go along with things, so desperate to be liked, to please the other person. I would lose myself completely, and I guess I wouldn't even realise at the time how much I was abandoning myself through all of this. But some of my romantic relationships, I think particularly my 20s, they just did not end well because I could not communicate openly how I felt. And I had abandoned myself, I'd gone completely along with things, and then it all started to kind of leak out. Actually, it would be quite clear that I wasn't happy with a lot of things, but it would kind of not end in a nice kind of talked through understanding way towards one another. It would probably get to a point where there was this sort of explosive outburst, and then it would be quite a destructive end, and there'll be a lot of animosity and perhaps a kind of resentment and anger from the other person in terms of not understanding why I was suddenly kind of going from seemingly happy with everything to suddenly not happy with things. And for them, it came out of the blue because I wasn't able to kind of filter that information, more kind of helpfully in a more drip-fed constructive way, it would be like, please, 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 please. Then suddenly, out of the blue, everything erupts. And the other person's a bit like, oh my goodness, where did this come from? And very, very damaging for the relationship. So I guess it's important to say as well that even though I've recovered now from bulimia for many, many years, people pleasing is something I'm still working on. I mean, I feel generally I have become much better at being assertive, much better at being in touch with my own thoughts and feelings, not abandoning myself. But it is a little bit of the thorn in my side, and it's probably something I'm going to be working on for the longer term. So I think that generally people with eating disorders are kind and sensitive souls who care a great deal about other people's feelings. They're often huge empaths, very tuned into their fellow humans, very, very caring people, good at reading body language and sensing how someone around them is doing emotionally. So kind of picking up all those signals. Now, of course, being tuned into the emotions of others is a really valuable life skill, helps you forge relationships and strong connections. However, if this kind of strays into people pleasing, you are often tuning into others at a real personal cost to yourself. So rather than a healthy balance of empathy towards others and empathy and kindness towards yourself, you're probably ignoring your own needs and focusing too much on meeting the needs of those around you. And if you live your life like this, it can come at huge personal cost. And as described really from some of the costs in my own life. So let's look up a couple of definitions of people pleasing. So from the Cambridge Dictionary, someone who cares a lot about whether other people like them and also wants others to approve of their actions. And looking at the Psychology Today website, a people pleaser is a person who has an emotional need to please others, often at the expense of his or her or their own needs or desires. So the tricky thing is that somewhere along the way, people pleasers decide that everyone else's needs are more important than their own. They put themselves on the back burner in their own lives, and this can often end up to resentment, dissatisfaction, and feeling very depressed. So there are huge costs. If you're a people pleaser though, you often might rather deal with the resentment and the fallout of pleasing, the cost to yourself, because that can sometimes feel preferable to dealing with guilt. Because I think often as a people pleaser, if you do put yourself first or if you do honour your own needs, you can feel a very, very strong feeling of guilt. So it's remembering though, isn't it, that people pleasing normally develops as a survival strategy when you're a child to feel safe and secure in your environment. So it can happen for all kinds of reasons. So if you recognise people around you who are struggling emotionally, you may have learned to be the good child, to keep harmony and smooth everything over, not wanting to burden others. And maybe you had a parent or a sibling who emotionally needed a lot of support and attention. So maybe, you being the kind of good child who's very pleasing just took the burden off everyone else. And maybe you had a friend or a friendship group where you didn't feel secure or liked, so you felt that you had to very much mould yourself to be accepted. And maybe you identified as a good child. You didn't want to cause your parents any upset or distress because maybe they were dealing with a lot already. Maybe there was redundancy or divorce or bereavement, or maybe there's a lot of stress going on. And as a child, if you can see that your parents are struggling, you just don't want to cause them any more distress. So you will often become a pleaser to kind of minimize the distress for others, minimize kind of burdening others in any way. And maybe for whatever reason, you feared disapproval or conflict, and people pleasing felt safe and very known. So it's very complex and can be for multiple reasons. But I guess the problem is, once we take on the people pleasing roles, particularly as we start to grow up, it can become part of our identity. And the pleasing cycle really perpetuates itself, because if you show up in a conditional way to please others, they will give you approval for being that kind of conditional self. And then you feel that you have to maintain that to be liked. Then you lose yourself, you lose your own thoughts and feelings, you just lose a whole sort of sense of who you are, and the cycle continues, and it can be hard to exit from. So let's focus specifically on some of the costs of people pleasing. So I'm going to focus on 6 costs. Okay, so number 1, you show up in a very conditional way. So you feel that people only like you if you behave or show up in a certain way. So other people's love or liking towards you feels very conditional. So it might be that you feel that you have to be really academic, or you have to be really into fitness, or you have to be really thin, or it could be all kinds of things. And when you are in a very sort of conditional sort of world, you feel you're sort of showing up and only showing people part of you. You're not being wholeheartedly yourself. People don't know the full you. And this is a horrible place to be in, because you start to feel as well that you're only loved or liked for being a certain way. So then you have to please even more. So in my own experience as well, this kind of conditional way of showing up in the world, it was demonstrated as well profoundly through my bulimic behaviours. So outwardly, I'd seem to be relaxed around food, outwardly smiley, compliant, harmony keeping, coping, juggling life, getting on with things. Whereas behind closed doors, I'd be binging and purging, I'd be anxious, I'd be chaotic, I'd be impulsive, I'd be self-destructive. And in terms of what the world saw and what was going on behind closed doors, they were worlds apart. Because actually, I was just sort of showing up in the world trying to be what I thought others wanted me to be, and just hiding my shadow side. And, we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses, it's part of being human. No one is perfect. We can't just kind of be happy and positive and coping, etc. all the time. It's just not realistic. Number 2, you're not being real or authentic. Now, when we people please, other people don't really get the chance to know the real you. So you're actually then quite controlling, even not intentionally, in your relationships. So by assuming that other people won't like you or that they'll reject you, you don't really give people the chance to actually get to know you fully. And actually what you don't know is that people actually might accept you so much more than you realise. And if you don't tell people how you feel or what you think, they can't mind read. And so it's really tricky, isn't it, in a way, because you can feel angry and resentful that people don't really know the real you, but you're also not giving them a chance to get to know the real you. And I guess what's important here as well is I'm talking about showing people the real you in healthy relationships. Obviously, if you're in an abusive relationship where actually when you are showing your real self, you're receiving abuse or criticism or hostility, that is not helpful. I'm talking about showing up authentically where there is trust, acceptance, love, all the good things. Number 3, another cost of people pleasing. You get angry. Gosh, this was so much me. But outwardly, people would not have described me as an angry person. I would be seen as the kind of happy person who was just really easygoing, etc. And I found it really hard to identify or even own my own anger. I'd find that very, very challenging to recognize that in myself. But people pleasing, it definitely leads to a build-up of anger and resentment. So you're really at risk of all your feelings building up and exploding out one day, which can be very damaging for a relationship. And also it can leave you feeling actually quite depressed, because if you've got a lot of suppressed anger, you're kind of holding all of that, and it can make you feel very, very low in mood. And it can cause you to make more sort of drastic decisions or to damage your relationships. Definitely true for me. You might suddenly just cut people out of your life, drastically leave. Suddenly everything explodes one day and the other person wonders what is going on. Because of all this anger, it can't just kind of stay under the surface forever. And so it can be very, very destructive in your relationships. Number 4, you have a real lack of authenticity. So people don't see you as genuine. And I remember people feeding this back to me sometimes, actually. And this did actually great with me, where people would say, actually, Harriet, we don't really know what you're thinking because you're kind of smiling all the time, but sometimes that smiling doesn't feel real. And that was helpful feedback for me, although it was really uncomfortable for me, because I realised that actually, I wasn't being authentic. And being authentic is something that's really, really important to me. So as human beings, we do pick up on signs that someone's not being authentic. People pleasing tends to lead to confusing and conflicting messages. For example, sort of smiling in the moment, but then being late or avoiding someone because actually you are feeling angry towards them due to your people pleasing. So this for me was definitely a big motivator around change, that I didn't want to be this non-authentic person, because being authentic is a very important value to me. Number 5, your relationships lack respect. Your relationships can lack respect and you can get taken advantage of, because if you don't communicate your needs, others might assume that all is well, and it's very easy for someone who is naturally more assertive in your life to make the decisions and take the lead. And more worryingly as well, you may have someone in your life who's actively abusive or over-controlling, and this can lead you down a very dark road. So I think this kind of lack of respect is profoundly damaging. I know for myself as well, sometimes I would be very drawn perhaps sometimes to people who were a bit over-controlling, and that was really, really unhealthy for me. It would lead to a real lack of respect for myself, a real lack of respect in the relationship, which was not healthy at all. So my 6th cost, a real loss of oneself. So when you people please a lot, you lose yourself entirely, and you might be highly attuned to what your partner or your best friend or your parent thinks about a situation, but you may have no idea about your own wants, needs, thoughts and emotions. And when you've people pleased a lot, you've really abandoned yourself, and it's very challenging to even know what you think about certain things or how you feel about them, because you're so used to checking in with that external person or your environment before you make a decision. And this can lead as well to a profound sense of disconnection to yourself. And I know a lot of my clients will say, I'm kind of doing all the things that are supposed to make me happy and what my parents have told me, what my friends have told me, but I don't feel happy at all. And I guess this is a really good example of when someone has become very disconnected from themselves, because in a way, what really works for your parent or your best friend or other people in the world is not going to necessarily work for you. And in a way, you are the expert on you, and it's only when you go within that you can start to listen to that voice and start to trust your own wisdom and guidance and be led towards the things that are going to make you happy and light you up and really fulfill your desires. So, as I've said, I'm still a work in progress for all of this, but I'm going to talk about 6 strategies now that have helped me to stop people pleasing and to become much more of myself. So number 1, listen to your heart. Okay, so only you know in your heart what is best for you. Other people can support and advise you, and this can be valuable. We do need other people. You can listen to this advice though, and you can just reflect on it, and you can take on board what works for you, and you can also reject the parts that are not relevant for you. Okay, ultimately though, you can make your own decisions, and you can start as well with very small decisions that don't really matter that much. So that sort of finding your voice muscle is one that you need to flex and simply give it a go to build it. Now, I know for me, I've had to really strengthen this muscle a lot over the years. And the ways that really help me to do this is sometimes speaking out loud. I might look a bit crazy sometimes, but if I have a problem sometimes, I'm driving along in the car, I might almost pretend I'm in therapy and just kind of ask myself the question, how do I feel about this? And just see what comes out of my mouth. Okay. Now, for me, actually speaking things out loud is really, really, really helpful, because sometimes when it's all in my head, I don't really know what I'm thinking. I haven't got clarity, but once I start to speak it out loud, actually I start to get clarity. I start to get a sense of what is right. Okay. And sometimes things aren't straightforward. Sometimes I might have to have quite a few conversations with myself before I'm going to get to a place of peace and acceptance and clarity and understanding, okay? Because some things are tricky in life. Also, speaking to a trusted friend is really, really helpful. I think when you can speak to someone who's good at listening, who can help you gain perspective, maybe reflect back to you what you're thinking, this can be really, really helpful as well. So I think it's really important with this, it's the right person. If you gravitate towards someone who's going to try and fix you and tell you what to do, that's not so helpful, because of your people-pleasing tendencies will mean that you want to do what that person has told you to do. You need someone who's really good at that more kind of active listening role. You could as well use a journal, write it down. This can be something that's really helpful as well. And I think it's finding your own personal outlet for this. And we're all a bit different in terms of what works best. Number 2, free up space to listen to yourself. So you need to have time away from people so you can learn to tune into your thoughts and feelings. If you don't know how you feel about something, if you don't give yourself space to actually just reflect, think about it, ponder on it, it's really, really hard to know how you feel. And I think many of us are spending our lives being so busy, filling life with so many things that we just don't have time to reflect and to tune in with ourselves. And that's part of the problem. And I think people as well sometimes are scared of tuning in because they're worried about what dark things are going to float to the surface. But actually, so much wisdom is within us. And I think you just have to start small with this as well. Maybe like when you're doing the washing up or something, or folding up washing, or whatever it is you're doing, just allow yourself 10 minutes without any podcasts, any external noise. Allow yourself just to kind of check in with yourself and notice how you're doing, because there's so much wisdom within us, okay, which we can start to listen to. Sometimes as well, if I am asked if I want to do something, in the moment, my tendency can be to people please rather than really think about, is this right for me or not? So I think what's quite helpful is in the freeing up space place as well, is to say to someone, let me have a think about that and get back to you. And then you can have some quiet time away and really ponder on whether you want to say yes or whether you want to say no, and just really consider what is right for you. So for me, I've had to learn to get a lot more comfortable with my own company and with thinking my own thoughts and feelings rather than looking externally. Now, when I went off to Australia in my early 20s, I was almost forced to have some time to ponder and reflect because I was away from my support network, I was away from my family, I went traveling on my own, so I ended up spending quite a lot of time on my own. So I was almost forced to go inwards, and I didn't have the distraction of studying, of working. I mean, I was working for some of the time, but it was the first time in my life I had a lot of space freed up to really focus, and that was really, really helpful. Now, obviously, you don't have to go to Australia or some far-flung country to do that, but sometimes just getting out of your sort of familiar environment can be very, very helpful. Number 3, go inwards and start to notice, how you're feeling and what do you really enjoy, what lights you up. Spend time getting to know yourself. What do you like doing? What lifts your energy and makes you feel joyful? And it doesn't matter if it's different from what you feel you should be doing to make yourself feel joyful. And it doesn't matter if it's different from people around you. We're all completely unique. And up until this point, you may have been very guided by those around you because, we're social beings as humans, aren't we? And if people around us are doing certain things and that's making them really happy, then you might think, well, that's what I need to do. But maybe, what other people close to you are doing is not your thing. I'm just using an app at the moment, actually. It's called Rosebud app. And this is an app where you can record your reflections over the course of a day, record kind of like, you can write it or you can record it, but you can think about, things that really brought you pleasure, a sense of achievement, satisfaction, when you had good connection with people. And it really helps you reflect and tune in so you can start to kind of capture those little moments. And obviously you don't need to use an app to do that. There's numerous ways that you can do that, but it's about checking in with yourself more regularly. Number 4, know that it's impossible to win and please everyone all the time, okay? It's impossible. If you ask 20 people their opinion, you're going to get 20 different responses. So you can't please everyone all the time, and you don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to feel guilty about having needs and taking care of yourself. And in fact, when you look after yourself first, you can make an active choice to be generous and kind to the people who you really care about. And the guilt feeling will often still come up because it's rooted in childhood. So I sometimes almost label this as trauma guilt, really, because it's that old feeling that's very familiar that will come up again and again, but you don't have to respond to it in the same way. You can develop a different relationship with it. You can see it as that kind of trauma guilt or pleasing guilt and a hangover from your old ways of coping. And remember, it's not a good path to tread when you're saying yes, but you're inwardly feeling angry and resentful. It's far better to say a wholehearted no and to be genuine in your relationships. And something as well that's helped me with this even recently is Mel Robbins, the personal development person who has the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. If you Google Mel Robbins, lots will come up if you haven't heard of her. But she talks about as well, when you stop people pleasing, you do often have to deal with other people's disappointment in those situations. And I know for me, the thought of disappointing someone used to almost kill me. I used to think, oh, that would just be so unbearable. I can't deal with other people's disappointment. But actually, someone can be disappointed when we say no, but they can still love us and they can still value the relationship, and it's not going to sort of destroy everything as in our worst fantasies. So I think that's been really helpful for me, even just recently, realizing actually we can say no, someone can be disappointed, but hey, life goes on, we still maintain the relationship. Everything is still okay. Number 5, put the good old blinkers onto comparisons. I'm always saying it, aren't I? But if you constantly evaluate yourself in relation to those around you or on social media, you're going to criticize yourself, notice where you're feeling short, stops you appreciating the qualities you have, makes you again just be much more likely to kind of please, be very conditionally accepting of yourself. Not helpful. Number 6, create a positives diary. Practice gratitude every day. Remember to appreciate the little things that you do. Notice daily the things that have gone well and the little victories you have achieved. Develop this inner world and this inner muscle. Now, this is something I've really become quite good at, and I regularly just check in with myself and kind of can delight in the little wins that are going on in my life. And it can just be like the such mild things, the little things like, just going out and feeding the guinea pig and seeing the guinea pig happy, or spending a bit of time with a cat, or maybe hoovering my really messy hall that's just covered in grass from the garden. I don't know, just the really little things. And the more you can go inward and just get those little wins, and the less you're going outward by looking at what everyone else is doing, I tell you, you're going to feel so much better. Gosh, I'm aware this isn't a very bite-sized episode, is it? Anyway, we continue. So when I reduced my people-pleasing behaviours, I was so worried that the world would reject me, I'd be alone, abandoned, just terrible life, etc. But in reality, I found that people liked my non-pleasing self. It was refreshing, real and authentic. And other people like to know where they are with you. Actually, if we've got someone around us who's honest, who communicates directly with warmth and kindness, it does really improve our relationships. It's nice to know where you are with someone and that someone's being honest with you. And guess what? In 95% of my relationships, people could cope with the whole version of me rather than the pleasing version. And my people pleasing was really rooted in many outdated beliefs and outdated kind of earlier relationships that hadn't been so healthy. And, my view of the world just wasn't serving me anymore. And if people don't approve and only like you for being your people pleasing self, then maybe this is a relationship that needs to be looked at. So perhaps you need some boundaries or limits in place. Perhaps you need to limit your interaction with that person. And perhaps you can even talk to them about what's going on, and have some real open communication. So I think as well, it is a reality that when you become more true to yourself, you might lose some people along the way. But fundamentally, I guess, if you really are losing people because they're not accepting you for being your whole self, those are not people that you really want to have sticking around. Now, I know for myself and in my life, there's certain relationships, perhaps with some of my family members, where, I want to still be in relationship with them because fundamentally they are my family and I love them, but I do have some quite strong boundaries in place to protect myself. Okay, so I'm not kind of in those relationships in the way that I used to be in a not such a helpful interaction. So I think it doesn't have to be kind of suddenly you just lose everyone in your life in this very dramatic fashion. But I guess what's important as well is I think having a few people in your life where you can be truly yourself is just way better than having many kind of like weaker connections where you're just having to be your conditional self. Okay, I would just say that 100%. So finding true self-acceptance and letting go of the fear of not being liked is an ongoing journey, but it's well worth taking the risk to find out who you are. And this is when you can truly tap into your own happiness and joy. So wishing you all luck in this ongoing journey. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out at the Eating Disorder Therapist _ For further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. So you might be interested in one-to-one therapy with me. I do have a bit of a waiting list for that at the moment. I think it's around 12 weeks. But you might be interested in my online course, which has 50% off at the moment from the full price of £99 with the code Freedom is Possible. So it's great value actually. If you really want to get a taste of what it's like to work with me, to understand my approach, that's a great way to really kind of get a taste of that. And it's got about 25 videos, I think about 30 lectures. There's a lot of content there. It will really kind of help you on your food, body, relationship journey. If you enjoy this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.